Hey, I'm Nancy Cavey, National ERISA and Individual Disability Attorney. Welcome to Winning Isn't Easy. Before we get started, I've got to give you a legal disclaimer. This podcast isn't legal advice. The Florida Bar Association says I've got to say this. So now that I've said it, I'll tell you nothing will ever prevent me from giving you an easy to understand overview of the disability insurance world, the games that disability carriers play, and what you need to know to get the disability benefits you deserve. So off we go. Do you have chronic fatigue syndrome? Well, this episode is for you. If you don't, I think there's still some takeaways to learn from. We've talked about this disease before, but I think there's so much more to discuss, especially in relation to disability insurance claims. I decided I'd just do another episode, and we're going to talk about 4 things today. Number 1, what type of doctor does the long-term disability carrier expect you to treat with if you have chronic fatigue syndrome? 2, what are the 2 things that you should be tracking in your chronic fatigue diary to win your claim? 3, what shouldn't you track in your claim? And 4th, why you should have a CPET test if you're applying for your long-term disability benefits because of chronic fatigue syndrome. Let's take a break for a moment before we get started with this week's episode. Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. Why you must have a CPET test if you're applying for disability benefits as a result of ME/CFS. ME/CFS are medical conditions that disability carriers hate because they are subjective in nature. While they may recognize the diagnosis, disability carriers always want objective evidence of your physical restrictions and limitations, your fatigue, and your cognitive difficulties. That can be hard to do. I think the best way to document the restrictions and limitations in an ME/CFS case is a cardiopulmonary exercise test known as a CPET test. Did you know that there are different types of CPET tests? Well, there are. One is a 1-day CPET test, and the second is a 2-day CPET test. Each has its own advantages and disadvantages, and I will tell you, each can be hard to obtain. A 1-day CPET test can be obtained from a cardiologist or an exercise physiologist. I am leery of testing done by a cardiologist because they're not sympathetic to why you're getting this testing for a disability claim, or I think necessarily how to interpret it in the context of a CFS diagnosis. Unfortunately, I will tell you the 1-day CPET test rarely addresses the common issues in CFS, which is the post-exertional malaise. That's why you're better off trying to get the more expensive 2-day CPET testing. I know it can be difficult to find, and it might be difficult for you to even find one in your state. You might even have to go to New York, Washington State, California, or even Florida for the testing, and that adds to the expense of an already expensive test. What do I recommend? Well, in certain cases, I'm going to recommend that more expensive 2-day CPET examination. If you don't pass the first test, you don't have to do the second day. But if you pass the first day, we really want the second day. We want to document the fatigue and cognitive issues. Now, I suggest that you contact and discuss with your doctor where there are CPET testing locations in your area and their thoughts about whether or not you should undergo a 1-day or a 2-day test. If you have any questions or issues, you can give my office a call and we can make some recommendations for you. What is it that you have to prove in your CFS disability claim? Well, remember, in any disability claim, be it ME/CFS or anything else, you have the burden of proof. And in my view, and as recognized by the courts, a CPET test can objectively document the functional problems you have in performing the material and substantial duties of your occupation. Now, do I think every ME/CFS claim needs a CPET examination? No, but I need you to remember that it's the gold standard test to document your restrictions. My recommendation is going to be based on the strength of your medical records, your doctor's willingness to fill out an ME/CFS residual functional capacity form and APS forms, who your carrier is, and what the policy says. So it's not just a cut and dried answer. If you do undergo a CPET exam, you want your doctor to sign off on these results. Now, don't be surprised rather, if your disability carrier asks for the raw testing data so that their liar-for-hire peer-reviewed doctors can review and comment on the results. Now, I want you to understand that even a 2-day CPET test is no guarantee that the carrier will agree with the results or pay benefits. But I will tell you, I have never seen a written judicial opinion rejecting the opinions of a CPET test. They're the gold standard for testing. And we want to make sure that that CPET testing corroborates any ME/CFS pain diary that you've been keeping. So I always want the CPET provider to have a copy of that diary if you've been keeping one. There's also an issue that you need to understand in the context of an ME/CFS case, and that's the subjective medical condition cap or limitation. There are some disability insurance policies that limit benefits for subjective medical conditions to just 2 years. And that's called a subjective medical condition policy limitation. Get your policy out and look for one. And what it says is something like this: the provision may limit the payment of benefits for subjective medical conditions like fibromyalgia, migraines, fatigues, muscle pain, or weakness to just 2 years. So depending on the terms of your policy, a CPET test might help us get past that 2-year subjective medical condition limitation. Again, each case is fact and medical specific. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of Winning Isn't Easy. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like our page, please leave a review, and please share it with your family and friends. And also, please subscribe to this podcast. That way, you're going to be notified every time a new episode comes out. Additionally, our 2022 Cavey Law Scholarship is up and running. We're taking entries until August. Head over to the caveylaw.com scholarship page to enter. I hope you tune in next week for another insightful episode of Winning Isn't Easy.